So Hugo Bos was born in the Netherlands, trained as a physical therapist for many years. He worked as an ergonomist in the business world, both in Netherlands and internationally. He was also the chairman of the Dutch Association for Ergonomics. In 2014, Hugo Bos established the Civitas Christiana Foundation out of concern for the attacks on Christian civilization in the Netherlands. He serves full-time as the Foundation's Executive Secretary and General Manager. He's also a member of the Netherlands TFP, Tradition, Family and Property Group, and a campaign leader of one of their principal projects, Culture Under Fire. Starting in 2014, it fights for the victory of Dutch culture and Christian traditions against socialism, Islamisation and the undermining of private property through climate coercion. Currently they have a supporter base of over 300,000 fellow campaigners, and Hugo frequently appears in the mass media as a commentator on current developments and is an accomplished public speaker. Hugo and his wife Helene are married when they were young, and they're parents to 4 children, 2 of whom are married and 4 grandchildren now. In his talks today, he will speak about the largely unknown facts about the message Our Lady gave in Fatima, like the solid proof for the miraculous events on October 13. Even atheists and communists were affirming their supernatural character thereof. So what does Our Lady say about the role Russia plays in this era? What did the 3 children see of hell, and how is that relevant for us today? And last but not least, are we in the end times now, and what to expect of the triumph of her Immaculate Heart? So let's please give a warm welcome for Mr. Hugo Bos.
Thank you very much, Robert, for your kind introduction. How's the hearing? You hear me well? Okay, I will dive in immediately, because I basically wrote 1 hour of text that I'm trying to squeeze in 45 minutes. So I hope we'll still have time for Q&A. If you have more a question of clarification, if I'm not being clear or anything, I don't mind being interrupted, but if you want to start a debate, that's better for the end. I'm also open to debate, but it would prolong my meeting. So it's an honor for me and a privilege to speak to you, fellow Catholics, real men, crusaders, men who pray the Rosary, crusaders in the honor of Our Lady, men who publicly pray the Rosary during rallies all across Australia. And maybe you're being laughed at, ridiculed or whatever, but you nonetheless stand there. It's a great achievement to have Rosary rallies in so many locations all across Australia. And in the Netherlands, we are looking at that with admiration. You have marched during nightly processions for the church and to do reparations for the sin of the world. And I was surprised to hear that there were over 1,200 participants. So this presentation will be about the message of Fatima and the coming chastisement. Is it a solution for today? This was your procession. It's correct, right? 1,200. Very impressive. So on October 13, 1917, a crowd of more than 70,000 gathered in a field called Cova da Ira in rural Portugal, in the midst of a driving rain, like today basically. That's very fitting. At the head of this crowd were 3 little shepherd children, lost in prayer before a small oak tree. Many spectators have reported that the top of the branches of the oaks were bent downward, almost as if some invisible person would be standing on it. On the photo, you see some of the at least 30 to 70,000 witnesses of this miracle. Many of these same spectators were becoming anxious and perhaps a little bit skeptical after they had traveled all those miles through a countryside in hoping of witnessing a spectacular miracle that of the young shepherds claimed Our Lady had promised to perform. And thus far, aside from a few bent tree branches, they had seen nothing. And just when it seemed that their trip had been in vain, Lucia, the oldest of the three shepherds, cried out loud, "Look at the sun!" At the same moment, the clouds parted like a curtain that was drawn aside, and the sun appeared, shining more brilliantly than they had ever seen before. But it did not hurt their eyes, even when they would stare into it directly. The sun began to whirl and dance like in the air, zooming to this side of the sky and to the other. And those present looked around, and they saw that the light of the sun was emitting every color of the spectrum as it reflected off the objects that surrounded them. After the dancing in the sky, for several minutes the sun appeared to fall rapidly towards the earth, only stopping when the terrified onlookers claimed it was on the verge of setting the whole surrounding ablaze. The whole event lasted around 10 minutes, after which the sun returned to its normal place in the sky as if nothing had happened. Then the crowd realized that the ground, the surroundings, and even their clothes that had been soaking wet of the rain had dried. Claims of mass hypnosis, if such thing is even possible, are refuted by the fact that the miracle had been witnessed at a distance of more than 20 miles away. I have just recounted one of its most high-profile and widely witnessed miracles of history. It is the miracle of the sun, which took place in Fatima, Portugal in 1970 and was witnessed by over 70,000 people. The purpose of this tremendous miracle was to give credits to the apparition and the message Our Lady had come to bring to the world through these three shepherd children. Even Portugal's anti-Catholic press, like the newspaper O Século, which means century or also secular world, was forced to report on this miracle. The news article stated that how the sun was dancing in Fatima. So if Our Lady worked such a miracle to prove the veracity of her message in Fatima, that means that each one of us has the obligation to lend a very close ear to what Our Lady was saying there. So I propose that we look closer and look at the Fatima message. But before doing so, it is essential to briefly narrate the Fatima story. Since many of you are already familiar with the story, I will be very brief. The events of Fatima began in 1916, 1 year before Our Lady appeared. At that time, the soon-to-be seers, Lucia, Francisco, and Jacinta, were 9, 8, and 6 years old, respectively. Lucia was the cousin of Francisco and Jacinta, and every day the three children would graze their sheep together in the countryside around Fatima. In the spring or summer of that year, while the children were grazing with their sheep, they were suddenly surprised to feel a strong wind that shook the trees, although the day was extremely calm. When they looked up to see what was causing the wind, they saw a very bright light that shone above the trees. And in the middle of this light, they saw a young man of around 14 or 15 years old. As you can imagine, the children are very terrified. So the young man immediately comforted them, saying, "Fear not, I am the angel of peace. Pray with me." He then taught the children a prayer, which he asked them to say often. It goes like this: "My God, I believe, I adore, I hope, I love thee. I beg thee forgiveness for all those who do not believe, do not adore, do not hope, and do not love thee." Several of you have probably heard of this prayer before. And then this appeared within the following words: "Pray thus, the heart of Jesus and Mary are attentive to your supplications." In the summer of the same year, the angel appeared a second time at the well near Lucia's home, where the children used to pray together. This time he asked them to sacrifice in reparation for the sins of the world. Finally, at the end of the summer of 1916, the angel appeared a third time, bringing the children communion. He appeared with a chalice in one hand and a bleeding host in the other. The drops of blood that fell from the host into the chalice. I saw in the church here, it's the first time I saw actually, that this part of the apparition with the angels appearing was also represented next to the statue of Our Lady of Fatima. Maybe you have seen. I've never seen before that it was portrayed next to a Fatima statue. It's very beautiful. The angel then prostrated himself on the ground before them, and at the same time he let go of the chalice of the host, which remained suspended in the air. And then he began saying a new prayer that goes like this. Most Holy Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, I adore thee profoundly, and I offer thee the most precious body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ, present in all the tabernacles on the earth, in reparation for all the insults, sacrileges, and indifferences with which he is offended, and through the infinite merits of his most sacred heart and the Immaculate Heart of Mary, I beg thee for the conversion of the sinners. I think many of you know this prayer. These are very beautiful prayers, isn't it? There you see the angel, the representation in Fatima of this apparition with the angel and the host and the chalice and the three children kneeling. He then rose and gave the host to Lucia, since she was the only one that had made her first communion. The others, he gave the chalice to Francisco and Jacinta, saying, take and drink the blood and body and blood of Jesus Christ, who was horribly insulted by ungrateful men. Make reparations for their crimes and console your God. It's something the children would say very frequently, right? If someone make an offense against God, make a sin, they would say, don't do that. Our Lord is offended already so much. After this, he prostrated again and repeated the same prayer 3 more times, and then he disappeared. These apparitions of the angel were to prepare the children to see Our Lady, which would happen 6 different times throughout the next year. The children recounted that they felt physically annihilated by the sight of an angel. They were exhausted afterwards. They were left feeling the power of God in a state of deep contemplation, which made them desire solitude, so that they did not speak much about it to each other. Our Lady, on the other hand, had the opposite effect on them. She filled the children with exuberance and a desire to speak and to share what they had seen and heard. This may explain why the story of the angel apparition was kept secret, whether the other apparitions of Our Lady were not. After having followed the angel's instruction and prayed for roughly a year, the children were prepared to receive the apparition of Our Lady, which began on May 13, 1917. Our Lady appeared to the children on 6 separate occasions. On these occasions, Our Lady warned the world about a profound moral crisis and gave the solution to the crisis and gave an idea of what we can expect in the future. So for the rest of this presentation, I will highlight the following 3 points. First, the moral crisis that Our Lady warned us about. Second, the solution which Our Lady gave us and whether or not the world has made use of this solution. And third, last, basing ourselves in the prophecies of Fatima, we will speak about what we can expect in the future. To understand these 3 points, I will base ourselves on the 3rd apparition, which took place in July 13, 1917. From a certain point of view, this is the most important of all the apparitions, because it was during this apparition that Our Lady gave the world the 3-part secret which contains the essence of the Fatima message. On July 13, Our Lady appeared to the shepherd children. After exhorting them to pray and do sacrifice, she opened her hands, and rays of light shone from them and seemed to penetrate the earth, which opened up before the children to reveal hell. And on the photo you see the faces of these 3 children after the apparition, and looking at their faces you can see the horror that is created by seeing hell. You see clearly, right? And you can imagine if you, having seen hell, you could tell by their faces they were impressed very much. And this is how Lucia describes the vision of hell. Quote, Our Lady once again opened her hands, as she had done the previous month, and rays emanated from them and seemed to penetrate the earth, and we saw, as it were a great sea of fire, and submerged in that were demons and souls in human shape, who resembled red-hot, black and bronze-colored embers that floated about in the blaze, borne by the flames that also issued from them with clouds of smoke, falling on all sides as sparks showering during a great blaze, without weight or balance. Amidst cries of groan and pain, despair and horrified us, and it made us shudder with fear. The devil stood out like frightful, unknown animals with horrible and disgusting shapes, but transparent like black coal, turning red hot. End of quote. Upon seeing this, the three children were so terrified that Lucia said they would have died of fear if they had not sustained a special grace. This set the stage for the second part of the secret, as Our Lady continued. I quote, You have seen hell, where the souls of the poor sinners go, and in order to save them, God wants you to establish devotion to my Immaculate Heart in the world. If what I say is done, many souls will be saved and there will be peace. The war is going to end, but if they do not stop offending God, another and even worse war will begin in the reign of Pope Pius XI. When you see a night illuminated by an unknown light, know that it is a great sign that God gives you, and He is going to punish the world for its crimes by means of war, hunger, persecution of the Church and of the Holy Father. And so this second war that would appear is of of course the Second World War. And the light that was saying here, the light that is described as being the start of this war, was the Aurealis, is it called? The Northern Light. And there's in the back a photo of a newspaper that was describing this Aurealis at 1938, I believe. So it was basically very much the beginning of the war, and was announced, just as Our Lady said, it was announced the Second World War. And the First World War ended, and then the second began because the world did not convert. To prevent this, is also still a quote, I come to ask for the consecration of Russia to my Immaculate Heart and the communion of reparations of the first Saturdays. If they listen to my request, Russia will convert and there will be peace. If not, she will scatter her errors throughout the world, promoting wars, prosecution of the Church, the good will be martyred, the Holy Father will have much to suffer, and many nations will be annihilated. In the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph. The Holy Father will consecrate Russia to me and shall convert, and a certain period of peace will be granted to the world. End of quote. So let's move on to the first point of this lecture, which is that Our Lady came to warn mankind about the immense moral crisis that is afflicting the world. There's a lot of evidence of this crisis contained in this message of Fatima. For one, we can see that each time that the angel appeared, the children insisted on the need for penance, because the sinfulness of the world, which is offending God terribly. And at the same time is present in 5 of the 6 times Our Lady appeared to the children. We also have the vision of hell, which point to this crisis. I mean, the problem with the world today is that many people are going to hell. And we can get a glimpse of the seriousness of this crisis by the fact that Our Lady showed the vision of hell to 3 innocent children who were merely 7, 9 and 10 years old. Imagine how serious it must be if Our Lady, who is the greatest of all mothers, was willing to subject these 3 tender young children to something so horrible as the vision of hell. I recently heard the audio tapes of an exorcism, and I can tell you, just hearing this recording was utterly terrifying. imagine how worse the vision of hell would be. I remember, unfortunately, I saw a video, Faces of Death. I do not suggest to any one of you to watch it. In fact, the video is objectionable from many different points, different perspectives. But the fact of the matter is that I did see. Anyway, at a certain point in this film, there is a clip of a public execution that took place amongst nomadic tribes that lived somewhere in the Middle East. It was a beheading that impressed me. Because during this execution, there was a mother with a young child standing in front of the row of the audience. At the moment of the beheading, the lady did what I think any good mother would have done at the time, and given the circumstances. She put her hands down to cover the eyes of the child, so she would not see what was happening. Now bear in mind that this was an uncivilized, barbaric tribe. Yet this woman still had the motherly good sense to shield her child from the violence of this execution. Now, Our Lady, isn't she the greatest mother that could exist? Saint Louis Grion de Montfort says that if we were to combine all the love of all the mothers in the world and concentrate all of that love in one single child, that love would still not equal the love of Our Lady has for each one of us. So Our Lady was an unfathomable greater mother than the one that you saw in this video. And the scene of hell was unfathomably more horrendous and more violent than the beheading scene in the Middle East. To get an idea of how horrendous hell is, which the Fatima children have seen, let us imagine the pain in hell. For us to have an idea, let us, for example, imagine a machine that crushes a man's finger. It can cause a great pain. But when the finger is finally crushed, there is eventually a time that it stops aching. The suffering can last a greater or lesser time, but it will always have an end. Now imagine a finger crushed not by a machine, but by a sheer weight of, let's say, I looked it up, a mountain in Australia, the biggest, Kosciuszko, or how is it? Maybe you've seen this mountain. Imagine this mountain, and you put it upside down, and then you have the weight of this mountain in the single peak, and all the weight of this mountain on your finger. Imagine this. This is imagine this mountain turned upside down on the top of a man's finger, waiting on it. This is something that can give us an idea of the concept that everything that is possible to suffer, that's what you will suffer in hell. Incidentally, we cannot even remotely have an idea or imagine everything that is possible to suffer in soul and in body. And hell is eternal. In what sense is it eternal? In the sense that it never passes. The pains of hell are fixed. They never diminish in absolutely anything. In other words, the person who goes there cannot have any hope of improvement in any sense of the word. If it did, that would be a source of joy. So let us say, for example, that a man has this mount, I cannot pronounce properly, Kosciuszko, waiting on his finger. And someone comes to tell him that the Mount Kosciuszko will be there only for a zillion years. And he spends a zillion years waiting for the hour when the weight will be lifted a little bit. Because for him, that would be a small relief. Well then, that does not exist in hell. The pains are continuous and for all eternity. Now why would a mother as great as Our Lady be willing to show such a horrendous vision to these three little children, for whom we know she had a special love? I think it is obvious, because the urgency of her message, because of the fact that those souls falling into hell were also her children, and that drastic measures were necessary if she were to save them. This should give us an idea of how serious the moral crisis is that we face today, and also of the importance of the Fatima message. Besides pointing out the existence of a profound moral crisis, Our Lady gave us also a glimpse of the nature of this crisis when she talks about the errors of Russia, which would spread throughout the world if the world did not listen to her request. So what do you suppose are the errors of Russia? The first and most obvious answer is, of course, communism. And in fact, Russia fell into communism a mere 3 or 4 months after Our Lady's prediction. So you could say that the error of Russia, which Our Lady predicted, were in fact the errors of communism. Now, on this point, we have a little bit of liberty to interpret exactly what is the error of communism. The most obvious error of communism in the horrible communist dictatorship that reigned and tormented Russia for over 60 years, and it still has control over China, Korea, Cuba, and elsewhere. But I firmly believe that the errors of communism go far beyond the radical examples, and that is not all Our Lady was warning us about. For example, inspired by a false philosophy of communism, Russia was the first country to legalize abortion in 1920. This was not an accident. Many think that abortion, homosexual marriage, sexual education in schools, all these perversions started in the 60s in the West. No, they did not start in the West. They started in Russia, in communist Russia. When you add communism, amoral atheistic philosophy, and a mixture of abortion on demand, it has an inevitable consequence. Could we then say that abortion and divorce are both errors of Russia? Next, how about radical Islam? While at first glance it may seem that radical Islam has nothing to do with Marxism, a very precarious study shows that there are profound links between the two. The terrorists who flew the planes into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon on September 11 were deeply inspired by Marxist ideals, primarily those concerning class struggle. A French Marxist theoretician turned Muslim named Roger Garaudy expressed well when he said, Islam needs to become again an Islam of the poor and against an Islam of the princes and the Ummah, who will make it the opium of the people. End of quote. Also, an article I read summarizes the matter quite well. I quote, while most Islamists reject Marxism, the influence of socialist ideology during the formative period of modern Islamism means that Islamists work continuously to be infused with Marxism language and concepts. For instance, a few an elite of vanguard to lead the Islamic revolution is borrowed directly from Lenin's vanguard of the proletariat. End of quote. An article written by Professor Gerges discusses the issue by analyzing a videotape released by Osama bin Laden. According to this article in the videotape, bin Laden launches an assault on capitalism and liberal democracy, loaded with Marxist and socialist terms. Indeed, bin Laden sounds more like Che Guevara and the Marxist revolutionaries than some of his rifle-toting Al-Qaeda cohorts. And accidentally, I heard a video this week, actually yesterday, about a lady commenting on the crisis that's going on in Iran now. And she was saying that the source is the red-green tyranny of the Marxists. She was saying, she is from Iran, and she said the Russians invaded Iran in 1920, and they spread these Marxist ideas amongst the Muslims, and so it's really a mixture of radical Islam and Marxism. That's what are the dictators of Iran. Quite in contrary to the people. Not all of them, of course, but many are against the regime, but they have no chance against the army in Iran. He goes on to explain. In the video, bin Laden addresses Americans and rails against the ills of economic exploitation, multinational corporations, and globalism. He then tells them to liberate themselves from the deception, shackles and attrition of the capitalist system. End of quote. Professor Gerges quotes bin Laden in a tape as saying, poor and... Can you still hear me? Poor and exploited Americans, united against our capitalist laws that make the rich richer and the poor poorer. End of quote. Sounds like a Marxist, right? But it's a quote by bin Laden. Ladies and gentlemen, if this is not communist rhetorics, I do not know what is. Gerges succinctly summarizes his thoughts on the matter and says, quote, intentionally or unintentionally, bin Laden is venturing into a new ideological terrain. He's blurring the lines between jihad, messianism and Marxist utopia. I think this gives also a perfect explanation why the left in the West, I mean in Europe we know all about it, why the left is favoring so much Muslim immigration. Why are they favoring that? At first glance you would think they're against many things that the Muslims hold. They're more, in a certain, they're more against LGBT, they're not favoring extreme abortion at least, not so extreme as the atheists, so you would think why are the left inviting them? And the Islam hates them. They're the first to die by a terror attack. But still, you see here there's a deep connection between Islam and the liberal West, or atheism. So we could see that radical Islam is one of those errors of Russia as well. How about secularism? I'm not certain whether or not Russia was the first secularist government in history. However, certainly the Soviet Union was the first official atheist state. This added to the spread of secularism and contempt for religion throughout the world. Couldn't we then say that secularism, as it exists today, that is banning nativity scenes and the Ten Commandment monuments from public property, couldn't we say that this is one of those errors of Russia? We can even see the errors of Russia in all the forms of socialist legislation that denies the right of property. In fact, Karl Marx even stated that one could summarize the whole theory of socialism in the abolition of private property. We see the errors of Russia in every movement that shifts importance to the right of the community over the right of the individual. For example, euthanasia. Euthanasia states that the strain that a certain individual puts on a society as a whole precedes their individual right to life, which is a Marxist notion. How about homosexuality? When the communists took power in Russia, sodomy was decriminalized. Only years when abortion on demand, homosexuality and generalized misery led to the decaying birth rates, only then, Joseph Stalin recriminalized homosexuality in an effort to stop the plunging population problems of Russia was facing at that time, and still is facing today. Nevertheless, at least in my opinion, communist Russia was the first Western country to legalize the sin against nature. And it's very prominent all across. If you go to St. Petersburg, Moscow, it's full of homosexual gay bars, prostitutes. There are over 3 million prostitutes in Russia. Abortion in 1965, I looked it up, and before and after it was not much better. There were 7 million pregnancies in 1 year, 7 million. 5 million were aborted and 2 million lived. So 7 of you, 5 are killed, 2 live. That is how it was in 1965. It has improved a little bit now, but the only reason for that is contraception. It's not a going back to morality at all. I wish it was. So I've compiled a list of 10 major errors in our current society that I feel are directly linked to the errors of communism, and that I wish to read to all of you. Abortion, banning of Christian expressions on the public property, radical Islam, inheritance tax, also called death tax, land confiscation for supposed environmental reasons, assisted suicide and euthanasia, divorce, homosexuality, and restrictions on gun ownership. Of course, my list is very incomplete, and I'm certain you all have a lot to add. My purpose here was not to give a complete list, but merely to show you that communism spread its errors far and beyond the confines of the Iron Curtain, and its influence continues to survive throughout the world today. We are witnessing the fulfillment of what Our Lady predicted in Fatima. But it does not end there. If we take a more profound look at the situation, we can see perhaps Our Lady was not speaking only about a direct and an indirect consequence of communism. According to Professor Plinio Correa de Oliveira's theory of revolution and counter-revolution, which is the foundation of the thought of the TFP, according to their thesis, communism is merely an episode in a century-old moral crisis that has been dominating the world since the fall of medieval Christendom, called revolution. Professor Plinio Correa de Oliveira is the founder of the TFP, which stands for Tradition, Family and Property, a Catholic lay organization of which I'm a member, active in 25 countries, including Australia. The TFP organizes campaigns to defend Christian civilization against the onslaughts of the revolutionary movements such as communism and the sexual revolution. Dr. Plinio's thesis on communism is rock solid, and so it's not surprising that others have held it in part or in whole. Many popes and intellectuals have done the same. Even Whittaker Chambers, the man who spent 27 years in an American communist before breaking away from the party, was one of the same opinion. And certainly he was qualified to say so. He knew the philosophy and the inner workings of communism better than anyone. He wrote a book recounting his experience with communism titled Witness. In the introduction he states, and I quote, "Few men are so dull that they do not know that the crisis exists." Here he's speaking of the same crisis that we have been speaking of and that he says has been, quote, "mounting for generations." Few men are so dull that they do not know that the crisis exists and that it threatens their lives at every point. It is popular to call it a social crisis. It is in fact a total crisis. Religious, moral, intellectual, social, political and economical. It is popular to call it a crisis of the Western world. It is in fact a crisis of the whole world. Communism, which claims to be the solution to the crisis, is itself a symptom and an errand of the crisis. He later says, quote, "Communism in our time cannot be more considered apart from the crisis than a fever can be acted upon apart from the infected body." End of quote. So he says that communism was merely the effect of a sick society, like a fever is the effect of a sick body. So when Our Lady spoke of the moral crisis in society and defined it as, quote, "errors of Russia," if we are going to look at all the consequences of what she has said and truly analyze her words, we would see that this is a warning about what the TFP calls the revolution that has been shaking Christian civilization for more than 500 years, starting with the Protestant so-called Reformation. You have to say so-called Reformation because it was not. This then is the first point that I said we would be discussing today. Our Lady came to Fatima to warn the world that there is an immense moral crisis shaking society. We saw that she defined the crisis as error of Russia, which we said were the errors of communism, which we saw go far beyond the radical communist dictatorship that have existed and still exist in many sectors of this world. Summarizing what we have seen until now, the influence of communism has spread with evils such as abortion, divorce, secularism, socialistic policies and radical Islam. And then we saw that to really understand what Our Lady was speaking about when she complained about the errors of Russia, we should put communism into the perspective of the century-old worldwide moral crisis which the TFP calls revolution. Is everything clear so far? Yes. Okay. Now we can move on to the second point of my talk. Will be challenging to meet the time, we'll see. We will now discuss the solution to this moral crisis, which Our Lady came to bring to the world at Fatima, and whether or not the world has made use of this solution. Well, the solution to the problem is clearly laid out in Our Lady's words when she said, quote, "To prevent this, I have come to ask for the consecration of Russia to my Immaculate Heart and the communion and reparation of the first Saturdays," end of quote. There are three other requests that Our Lady made at Fatima as part of the solution, which are amendment of life, recitation of the Rosary, and doing penance in reparation for the sins of the world and the conversion of sinners. Also very beautiful in the church, they put penance, penance, penance at the Fatima statue, something Our Lady kept repeating. So these 5 requests make up the solution to the moral crisis. And the first part is the consecration of Russia to the Immaculate Heart. And several popes did. In fact, many popes in fact did perform certain consecration, but none of them followed the formula described by Our Lady exactly. Except probably Pope Francis when he consecrated Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary in 2022. There's a big controversy over whether or not these consecrations were accepted by Our Lady, and I'm not going to enter into the whole debate about it. Sister Lucia herself, while she was still alive, gave her opinion as to whether or not the consecrations had been accepted by Our Lady. And at first she said it hadn't, and later she said it had been accepted. The fact of the matter is that when we look at the other things Our Lady asked for Fatima, we see that they have almost been completely neglected. Therefore, whether or not the consecration of Russia was valid, the other elements of the solutions are not in place. I mean, and secondly, even if the consecration done by Pope Francis, which I think in theory fulfilled all the requirements, it was in unity with the bishops, it was named Russia, the name Russia was mentioned, which the previous Pope didn't do. They spoke of some country in the east or something like that, very vague. But Pope Francis, I would say, fulfilled all of them. But even if that is the case, it was too late. Our Lady asked to Pope Pius XI to do the consecration before the war, and then the Second World War would not have started. So it's much too late even, I mean, way beyond. So her demands were not heard. I mean, who of you would think that the people have amended their lives since 1917? Who here thinks that the society today is more wholesome than it was back then? Please raise your hand. Okay, we can safely say that our request of Our Lady has been left unheeded. Now let's talk about the first Saturday devotion. I took this from your website. If you have never made this devotion, you're not alone. Most practicing Catholics around the world have not. Many cradle Catholics have never even heard of it. So once again, if you have not participated in the first Saturday devotion, do not feel discouraged, but do make the effort to do so. If anyone has questions about what the devotions entails or how to carry it out, I will be happy to give more information after the meeting, and there are several men here that know really well. So the communion and reparation has not been made by Catholics at large, and another request of Our Lady is unheeded. Now let's consider another devotion, the recitation of the Rosary. How many Catholics do you think pray the Rosary every day, as Our Lady requested at Fatima? Would anyone here dare to suggest that even 5% of the practicing Catholics in the world do so? Currently, only 2% of Catholics go to confession. So the number of those who faithfully pray the Rosary every day must be even smaller. This is yet another request of Our Lady that has been almost completely ignored. And by the way, if you do not yet pray the Rosary every day, don't feel discouraged, but make it into a daily practice. The last request is for penance, for the conversion of sinners and in reparation for the offenses committed against our Lord and Our Lady. Regarding penance, I think modern man has lost the very notion of what doing penance means. Even Lent fasting has been watered down so much that even the least pious person should have no difficulty whatsoever. We're only obliged, according to the bishop, to fast 2 days per year. Think about that for a moment. Only twice a year we are obliged to fast. Ash Wednesday and Good Friday. Bear in mind, when Our Lady came to Fatima asking for penance, in America and many other places in the world, Catholics were obliged to fast every day during Lent. And decide for yourself whether or not the world is more or less doing penance today than it was in 1917. The answer is obvious. We do less penance today than we did back then. And now I'm not necessarily saying that the old fasting rules should be implemented again. Maybe they should. I'm simply using it as an example that Catholics today have lost the spirit of sacrifice, whereby they would be even willing to do something painful for God. The fourth request of Our Lady has also been largely neglected. One by one, we can see that the request that she made in Fatima, in other words, the solution to the problem that she came to warn us about, has not been followed. Does anyone disagree? No one dares. Let us now turn to the third and final point of this talk. What can we expect for the future? But before we consider the future itself, we must first understand, based on what we cannot expect. Once again, we should turn to Our Lady's prophecy for guidance. In two separate passages, she tells us what will happen if her requests are heeded. Since we have seen her requests have largely been ignored, we can safely conclude that what should not expect as an outcome. The first passage appears at the end of the first paragraph. If what I say is done, many souls will be saved and there will be peace. End of quote. Clearly, we cannot expect this to happen until the world heeds what Our Lady asked in Fatima. The second passage similarly states, quote, if they listen to my request, Russia will convert and there will be peace. End of quote. Once again, the world has failed to listen, so we should not anticipate this outcome either. At this point, it is important to address a possible objection. Someone may say, when I say that Russia has not converted, I do not mean that in 1989, the fall of the Iron Curtain and the supposed end of communism, Russia effectively converted from communism. A closer look shows that Russia is far from converted. Even today, it remains profoundly influenced by the error of Russia, which we discussed earlier. To illustrate this, I will limit myself to just a few examples. One, concerning abortion in Russia. Although real statistics are hard to come by, since many abortions in Russia are still done illegally in clinics and never reported, in the mid-1990s, after the fall of the Iron Curtain, the Russian average was 225 abortions for every 100 births, and 89 abortions for every 1,000 women that are in childbearing age. Although this number has dropped since that time, there are still almost 500,000 abortions in Russia every year. A poll taken year after the fall of the Iron Curtain reveals that the majority of the Russian schoolgirls rated prostitution as a preferred profession. In addition to all of this, there is an alarming trend supported by President Putin to glorify Russia's Soviet past. This trend is well illustrated in an article on Wikipedia. Quote, Putin has been enthusiastic about erasing Russia's Soviet past from memory, has been unenthusiastic about erasing Russia's Soviet past from memory. He has stated his belief that whatever the crimes of Russian regime was, it nevertheless was an important part of Russian history and has a formative influence on the creation of modern Russia today. As a result, some Russian Soviet-era symbols have been allowed to return to Russia, such as the trademark of the red military flag and the Soviet star crest and the Soviet national anthem, even though with different words. All of which have resonated well with the majority of the Russian population, end of quote. I mean, in the Donbass in Ukraine, as soon as they conquered the Donbass, they put statues of Stalin. So if they really converted, you're not going to put a statue of Stalin there, right? Also, a recent article in The Economist stated that a full 75% of politicians in Russia are former KGB agents. So once again, let's look at the Fatima message itself for answers. Our Lady said, A war is going to end, but if they do not stop offending God, another worse war will begin in the reign of Pius XI, end of quote. And this did in fact occur. The World War II broke out in the reign of Pius XI. Let's continue, quote. When you see a night illuminated by an unknown light, know that it is a great sign that God gives you and that He is going to punish the world for its crimes by means of war, hunger and persecution of the Church and of the Holy Father, end of quote. Well, shortly before the outbreak of World War II, the most brilliant aurora borealis in the recorded history lit up the skies of Europe and the United States. It was so unusual that even many newspapers reported about it. War and hunger definitely did come as Our Lady predicted. But what about the persecution of the Church and of the Holy Father? Persecutions of the Church have been rampant since the message of Fatima. In fact, the 20th century saw more martyrs than other 19 centuries of the Church combined. What about the persecution of the Holy Father? We have not seen a major persecution of the popes since Our Lady appeared in Fatima, except maybe the shooting of Pope John Paul II on May 13, 1989. Let's continue with the message of Fatima. Quote, to prevent this, I come to ask for the consecration of Russia to my Immaculate Heart and the communion of reparation on the first Saturdays. If they listen to my request, Russia will convert and there will be peace. If not, she will scatter the errors throughout the world, promoting wars, persecutions of the Church. The good will be martyred, the Holy Father will have to suffer much, and many nations will be annihilated. End of quote. We have already seen that the error of Russia was spread throughout the world. There were a multitude of wars and persecutions of the Church. The good have been martyred, especially in places like China, Nigeria, and Sudan. In Nigeria last year, 3,500 Christians were killed. 3,500 in 1 year. And this is only the killings. This is not the rapes, the beating and all the other persecution. And this is only Nigeria. These things that Our Lady predicted have taken place. But what about the rest of what she predicted? Has the Holy Father suffered much? I do not doubt that the Holy Father suffers a lot. And while it is impossible to gauge his internal moral sufferings, we cannot say that the popes have undergone external persecution, like millions of Catholics did. What about the part that Our Lady above said, many nations will be annihilated? Has this occurred yet? If you consider closely what does the word annihilate mean, it means to destroy completely, that nothing remains. In other words, Our Lady predicted at Fatima a cataclysmic chastisement so great that many nations will be annihilated. This chastisement she foresaw is something we can definitely expect for the future. And this coincides perfectly with many other private revelations that have been made throughout the centuries of the Church. One of these I would like to mention took place a century before Fatima in Italy. A woman by the name of Blessed Elizabeth Canori Mora, obviously when discussing revelations, the Church has always suggested caution and prudence, like the Father was saying in the sermon. However, the vision of the Blessed Elizabeth were studied scrupulously by the Church, and in 1900 the ecclesiastical censor released his official judgment and stated, quote, there is nothing against the faith and good customs and no doctrinal innovation or deviation was found, end of quote, speaking about her private revelation. And this is what the Blessed Elizabeth foresaw about the coming chastisement. Quote, on Christmas 1816, Blessed Elizabeth saw how Our Lady, who appeared extremely sad, upon inquiring why, Our Lady answered, behold, my daughter, such great ungodliness. Blessed Elizabeth then saw apostates brazenly trying to rip her most holy Son from her arms. And confronted with such an outrage, the Mother of God ceased to ask for mercy for the world, and instead requested justice from the Eternal Father. Clothed in his inexorable justice and full indignation, he turned into the world. At that moment, all nature went into convulsion. The world lost its normal order and was filled with an almost terrible calamity, with the most terrible calamity imaginable. This will be something so deplorable and atrocious that it will reduce the world to the ultimate depth of desolation. God will allow wicked men to be cruelly chastised by fierce demons. This is still the quote from the Blessed Elizabeth. Because they voluntarily subjected themselves to the devil and joined the attack of the Holy Church. End of quote. Now remember, these visions were received by a woman who was beatified. These visions were studied by the Church and found to be free of error. These are not some ramblings of a crazy woman. The Blessed Anna Maria Taigi, speaking of this coming chastisement, said, quote, in 1837, God will ordain two punishments, one in the form of wars, revolutions, and other evils will originate on the earth. The others will be sent from heaven. End of quote. I think perhaps we are already seeing the first part of this chastisement, which concerns wars and revolutions. And later she says, quote, on this terrible occasion, so many of these wicked men, enemies of the Church and of their God, shall be killed by the divine scourge, that their corpses around Rome will be as numerous as the fish, which a recent inundation on the Tiber has carried into the city. All the enemies of the Church, secret as well as known, will perish over the whole earth during the universal darkness, with the exception of the few who God will soon after convert. The air shall be infected with demons, who will appear all under sort of hideous forms. End of quote. In order not to unnecessarily prolong this talk, and in order not to go too far of the subject matter, which should be Fatima, I will limit myself to a few examples. However, anyone who is interested in reading more of these prophecies, I suggest the book The Coming Chastisement by Yves Dupont. Before we move to the end of this talk, I'd like to briefly summarize what we have seen so far. First, we saw that Our Lady came to Fatima to warn the world about the existence of a major moral crisis. She defined the crisis as the errors of Russia, which we show are the errors of communism. These errors have continued to survive and even spread since the fall of the Iron Curtain and today, and have included abortion, socialistic legislation, and radical Islam. We will now speak of the solution which Our Lady came to bring the world. The solution is very easy and consists in 5 points. The consecration of Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, the amendment of life, the communion of reparation and the 5 consecutive first Saturdays, praying of the Rosary, and doing penance for the conversions of sinners in reparation of the world. I think they're mentioned here also. We saw that the world did not listen to Our Lady's request, and that therefore we can expect the fulfillment of the tragedies that Our Lady warned about in Fatima. Some of these tragedies have already taken place, others have not. What remains to be fulfilled is the great chastisement that will come. This chastisement will be so great that many nations will be annihilated. Well, I finish with the Spanish mystic, Venerable Maria Agreda. Quote, it was revealed to me that through the intercession of the Mother of God, all heresies will disappear. She's speaking about the triumph of Our Lady. This victory over the heresies has been reserved by Christ for his Blessed Mother. In the last time, the Lord will especially spread the renown of his Mother. Mary began salvation, and by her intercession it will conclude. Before the second coming of Christ, Mary must more than ever shine in mercy, in might and in grace, in order to bring unbelievers to the Catholic faith. The power of Mary in the last times over the demons will be very conspicuous. Mary will extend the reign of Christ over the heathens and the Muslims, and it will be a time of great joy when Mary is enthroned as Mistress, Queen of Hearts. End of quote. So in addition to the terrible calamities of chastisement, we could expect a brilliant era of peace that will come to the world. This is a fitting note for us to end our talk this morning, because this is what we of the TFP have dedicated our lives towards, That is the destruction of the moral crisis of our day and the establishing of the era of peace, the reign of Mary. Of course, to arrive at this era, we must first pass through terrible chastisement. However, rather than being filled with fear, the coming of this chastisement, we should advance with courage and confidence. We should remember words that Our Lady spoke to Sisters Lucia once when she complained that Jacinta and Francisco would be brought to heaven shortly, but that she would have to remain alone on earth. Our Lady said, "Do not be dismayed. I will never forsake you. My Immaculate Heart shall be your refuge and the road that shall lead you to God." End of quote. Our Lady is saying to each of us today, she is also still asking us to amend our lives, to say the Rosary, to do penance, and to make the first Saturday devotion. We should do this with hope, courage, and confidence, because regardless of what difficulties we should face, we know what the outcome of the battle will be. We know that we are on the winning side. We know that Our Lady's Immaculate Heart will triumph, and that she will have the final victory. In this presentation, we spoke about the Fatima message given by Our Lady and the three shepherd children, the moral crisis in the world and the error of Russia and the coming chastisement, but also the triumph of Our Lady's Immaculate Heart. I propose that we finish this meeting with 3 Hail Marys, asking Our Lady to delay no longer and bring the triumph of her Immaculate Heart as soon as possible.